In 1949, 2 million people fled mainland China for Taiwan, and neither side ever signed a peace treaty. This wasn't random. It was a chain reaction. Why has this unfinished split, rooted in clashing identities and competing claims, pushed China and Taiwan onto a collision course in plain sight? The real turning point did not come with recent headlines. It began decades earlier, and midway through in Act 3, we will show how it hits hardest inside today's identity shift. By the end of this video, you will understand how old battles, evolving identities, and global competition make the China and Taiwan standoff a structural crisis long before the world noticed. Near the end of the Chinese Civil War, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government faced defeat on the mainland. By late 1949, nearly 2 million soldiers, officials, and civilians boarded ships and planes across the narrow Taiwan Strait. They arrived on Taiwan bringing the Republic of China government, gold reserves, and a battered military to a new base in Taipei. The nationalists also kept control of Penghu, Kinmen, and Matsu, small but strategic islands just off the Chinese coast. Meanwhile, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China in Beijing. But the war never officially ended. No peace treaty was signed. The ceasefire lines hardened into a legal and political gray zone. Both governments, one on the mainland and one on Taiwan, claimed to represent all of China. The People's Republic of China had never ruled Taiwan, yet insisted the island was part of its territory. The Republic of China, now confined to the island, continued to claim legitimacy as the government of China. This unresolved ending left sovereignty in limbo, fueling decades of tension and military standoffs across the Taiwan Strait. Each side held fast to its claims. So, the world was left with a question. Is this a frozen civil war? That question still shapes every move in the region, and it is a thread we will follow as this story unfolds. Beijing's official stance leaves no room for doubt. Taiwan is labeled as a province, inseparable from the rest of China. Maps, government documents, and every major diplomatic statement from the People's Republic of China reinforce this claim. But on the ground, Taiwan operates with its own government, constitution, and a military that answers to Taipei, not Beijing. Presidential elections are held every 4 years with fierce debates and peaceful transfers of power. Laws are drafted and enforced independently, and the island issues its own passports. This is the reality. This gap between claim and reality creates a political standoff. For Beijing, the existence of a self-governing Taiwan undermines the One China principle that underpins its foreign policy. The Chinese government pressures other nations to avoid formal ties with Taipei, and it blocks Taiwan from joining most international organizations. At the same time, Taiwan's leaders point out that the People's Republic of China has never ruled the island, and daily life reflects a system completely separate from the mainland. Resolving this dispute is not just a matter of negotiation. It would require one side to give up a core part of its identity or sovereignty. That is why the issue remains locked in place, fueling tension each time the gap between claim and governance is exposed. Can both claims be true at once? Or is compromise impossible when the fundamentals collide? In 1987, Taiwan lifted nearly 4 decades of martial law. Overnight, political parties, newspapers, and protest movements sprang to life. The island's first direct legislative elections followed in 1992, and by 1996, voters stood in line for their first direct presidential vote, an event watched nervously by Beijing as missiles landed in the waters nearby. Democracy did not just change how leaders were chosen, it reshaped how people saw themselves. In the years after martial law ended, a new generation grew up with open debate, local media, and school books that told Taiwan's own story. Quick recap: democracy altered identity, and identity altered politics. By the 2020s, surveys from National Chengchi University showed that over 60% of residents identified as Taiwanese only, not Chinese. Among young people, that gap was even wider. Political parties began to campaign on protecting autonomy rather than reclaiming the mainland. Support for unification with China fell sharply, and calls for formal independence became more mainstream. This shift in identity was not merely cultural, it hardened political lines on both sides of the strait. For Beijing, each new poll and each election in Taiwan pushed compromise further out of reach. That democratic turn rewrote incentives and made compromise politically costly for both capitals. Next, we examine how those political incentives translated into strategic pressure and rising military readiness. Xi Jinping frames reunification as a historic mission tied to national revival. Inside China, official speeches and textbooks present Taiwan as unfinished business, not a distant dispute. That narrative creates public expectations and political pressure, and it shrinks the space for compromise. The People's Liberation Army has undergone a rapid military transformation. Its navy now numbers more than 370 ships, including the new aircraft carriers Shandong and Fujian. The rocket force fields hundreds of short-range ballistic missiles, all within striking distance of Taiwan's airfields and ports. Regular joint drills rehearse amphibious landings, missile barrages, and blockade tactics. Quick recap: Beijing combines a powerful political story with growing military options, and that combination changes incentives. Taiwan cannot match China ship for ship, or missile for missile. Instead, leaders in Taipei have invested in the porcupine strategy, focusing on making any invasion costly and uncertain. Mobile missile launchers, sea mines, and fleets of drones are deployed to complicate a landing. Commanders practice dispersed defense, using highways as runways and underground bunkers to survive an initial attack. Every new People's Liberation Army exercise is met with countermeasures and readiness alerts. As both sides build for worst-case scenarios, decision leads to consequence. Political incentives, military hardware, and constant drills feed into each other, and the result is higher readiness, less room for error, and a shrinking window for peaceful compromise. Next, we examine how rising readiness collides with U.S. policy and geography. Washington's approach to Taiwan is defined by deliberate uncertainty. Under the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, the United States supplies defensive arms and maintains close ties with Taipei, but stops short of promising direct military intervention. This policy, known as strategic ambiguity, is designed to keep both sides guessing. The goal is to deter Beijing from launching an invasion, while also discouraging Taipei from declaring formal independence. It is a balancing act that has held for decades, but it comes with risks. The lack of a clear defense pledge means every crisis in the Taiwan Strait tests the boundaries of American commitment and Chinese patience. So, does uncertainty deter invasion, or does it invite miscalculation? Taiwan's position on the map magnifies these stakes. The island sits at the heart of the first island chain, a string of territories stretching from Japan through the Philippines. Control of Taiwan would give China direct access to the Western Pacific, reshaping the region's military balance and opening new routes for its navy. For the United States and its allies, Taiwan acts as a strategic barrier, helping to contain Chinese power projection. Shipping lanes through the Taiwan Strait carry nearly a third of the world's container traffic, linking East Asia to global markets. Any conflict here would ripple far beyond the region, disrupting trade and pulling in major powers. Ambiguity buys time, but it also creates uncertainty. In a high-stakes environment, misreading intentions or overestimating resolve could turn a standoff into a crisis. The geography and alliances make sure that what happens in the Taiwan Strait never stays local. Next, we will examine how ambiguity can backfire in a crisis. Only about a dozen countries maintain formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan today. Most states, pressured by Beijing's One China policy, have switched recognition to the People's Republic of China. This leaves Taiwan excluded from the United Nations and most international bodies, relying instead on unofficial partnerships and informal support. Diplomatic isolation is not just symbolic. It means that in a crisis, there are few legal guarantees or institutional protections. Military pressure has become routine. In 2022 and 2023, Chinese military aircraft entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone nearly every day, with more than 1,700 sorties recorded in a single year. Naval drills, missile tests, and simulated blockade operations now occur so frequently that alerts and intercepts are part of daily life for Taiwan's armed forces. Each maneuver is presented as a warning or a rehearsal, but the effect is to normalize a state of constant tension across the strait. Quick recap. Limited diplomatic protection raises vulnerability, and routine military pressure turns stress into everyday experience. The risk is not just in the numbers. When military encounters become predictable, the danger of a sudden accident or miscalculation grows. With limited direct communication and few diplomatic channels open, a single misread signal or an unintended clash could escalate before leaders have time to react. That is escalation, by accident, not design. The standoff has settled into a new normal. Isolation and routine pressure make the line between peace and crisis thinner than ever. How will that thinner line change political calculations in Beijing, in Taipei, and in the United States? Up next, we examine how those incentives shape decisions and raise the odds of escalation. Today, the Taiwan Strait is one of the world's tensest flashpoints, where identity, power, and technology collide. As military drills and political rhetoric intensify, miscalculation risks grow. The next move is not just about borders, it is about the future balance of Asia. What happens here will echo far beyond these shores.